It's a funny place to be, stuck in a seemingly mundane world with an inner knowing that the universe is so much more than our mortal minds can comprehend. Yet we all have the capacity to know peace and our oneness with the wholeness of life. And through these interviews, discussions, and reflections, it is my intention to share this possibility. I'm Ryan Kurczak, and this is the Kriya Yoga Podcast.
I should stop drinking tea, shouldn't I?
Okay, welcome back everybody to the Kriya Yoga Podcast. I'm here again with another very special guest. His name's David, and he is from Ireland. And I met him many years ago at CSA, and we became pretty good friends and stayed in touch. And we've been planning to do a podcast together probably for maybe a year and a half to 2 years, but the time never seemed right. But about a week ago, we got together and started chatting again, and it seems like everything was falling into place. David, along with being a Kriya Yoga practitioner initiated by Roy Davis and also ordained by Roy Davis through Center for Spiritual Awareness, he works in education and coaching with his own company called Better Life Abroad. So let's just go ahead and welcome David. So thank you for being here today, David. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. It's nice to chat with you.
Yeah, you too. So before we started this podcast, one of the things we got to talking about, which I thought we should save for the podcast, was just how did we meet? So when was the first time you made it to CSA, and was that around the time that we met up, or was it, do you remember? Because I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I remember. It
just seems like I've always known you.
Well, actually, funnily enough, we met back in 2008. I attended CSA for the first time, and I had made a plan to be there for the full extent of a tourist visa, which is 90 days. So I stayed in CSA for 90 days, and I met yourself and Melissa. Mm-hmm. You were talking with Kathleen down by the pond on CSA grounds. You had either just brought some goldfish with you and put them into the pond, or you were checking up on some goldfish that you had already put in the pond. And I just happened to be emptying what you guys call trash, I'll call rubbish. Just putting some rubbish down to the containers at the end, just outside the offices. And I bumped into all three of you, and Kathleen introduced me to you guys. And I had long hair at the time, and I think you might have been envious of it, because considering now you're long hair.
Yes, I remembered having long hair, and then I didn't, and so that's probably true.
Yeah. So that's when we met. That was it. That was my first time in CSA, and so it probably would have been around June 2008. I'd say the start of June.
Yes. So I wasn't actually in the pond yet putting goldfish. I was just talking about it with Kathleen.
Yeah. Something along those lines. You might have already put them in. You might have been just inquiring whether she was feeding them or what. I'm not sure, but yeah.
It's possible. I remember many times trying to stock that pond with goldfish, and I either got eaten by raccoons or hawks, so I finally gave up.
And was there talk of turtles as well? I vaguely remember that you might have been talking about there was a turtle in the pond eating.
Yeah, there were at least 2 big turtles, which probably also contributed to the inability for the goldfish to thrive.
Yeah. Well, anyway, out either way.
Yeah. Before we get a little deeper into our own personal history, could you say something about the work that you do with Better Life Abroad? I know that's something that you started in the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've been over and back to Ireland quite a bit. Like, I'm from Ireland, I live in Ireland, but sometimes I've lived abroad. And my last time coming home to Ireland was in 2015. And I had, I suppose, become more familiar with what coaching was as a skill set. And because I had lived abroad quite a bit, it just seemed natural that I could use that skill set to help people who were experiencing the challenges of living and working in a foreign country. So I just kind of meshed the experience and, I suppose, newly found skills, and I put them together to help as many people as I could. I wouldn't say it's a thriving, flourishing business, although all the while I've been teaching English as a foreign language. That's something that I do on the side, and just other bits of educational bits and pieces. But yeah, so it's just been a constant over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's just allowed me to keep in contact with a variety of cultures and languages, and just the things that kind of stimulate me, while at the same time offering something back.
Yeah, because you like to travel. You're sort of like a world traveler, huh?
Yeah. It's funny, the word travel, because I won't get into it, but it just, you have different connotations. You've got the backpacker, and then you've got the person who lives abroad. I've done more of the living abroad than the backpacking.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I don't like to go backpacking, but it's just, I always have a tendency to end up living in the place.
Right.
So I'm a bit wary about going anywhere these days. I haven't left Ireland very frequently.
Well, we were supposed to come and visit you, but it turns out that things worked out such that I did not buy plane tickets.
Yeah, absolutely. With the bigger vision, you can see how everything has worked out perfectly. But back at the time, yeah, you were gutted.
Yeah. Yeah, Ireland is definitely one of those places that I've always wanted to go, and for some odd reason never made it. Even though we met up over in England, right, with Richard Fish in 2011 or so.
Yeah, and it's just so close. You'd been up in Scotland as well, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Just a hop, skip, and a jump.
Next time.
Yeah. Make it happen.
But one of the reasons, I wanted to talk to you in particular, especially now and on this podcast at this time, was because I remember you both at CSA and just in our normal interactions, correspond over email, and then when we met up in England, I remember you being a very intense yogi meditator. I remember going into CSA, and I could never really do the whole lotus posture bit. I always sit in a chair. And I can remember going into the meditation hall, and you were always right up there by the by where Roy would talk, and you weren't sitting in a chair. You were kind of locked in the lotus posture. So you always seemed very intense in regards to your drive with meditation and the Kriya Yoga practice. But as you told me, you kind of fell away from it from a bit, right?
Yeah, I fell away from it. I suppose I fell away from it more or less around 2013.
Okay.
Or maybe it was a bit. No, it would have been after. It would have been between 2013 and 2015. Just life circumstances kind of had me look at who I was as a meditator, as a yogi, as a practitioner, and I suppose I was just knocked around enough to kind of take a step back and look at what was going on. Right. When you talk about me sitting there in the lotus posture at the altar, I was very intense. I was very, very committed to the practice. And at CSA, I used to love going to CSA just for the simple fact that you had so many hours available in the day to just meditate. And I really, really loved that. Right. And the actual practice of meditation, I still love it. And it's something which I look forward to actually sit down and do it. But I think when you talked about me sitting in the lotus posture, that's an interesting thing because, CSA don't go out outrightly promote sitting in the lotus posture. It's not, it doesn't help you in your meditation really in any way. But,
right. But you looked good.
Yeah, but that's the thing. And I suppose there's a part of me which was sitting there going, I look good. Here I am, and anybody who walks in, even though it's an 11-acre site, and I was on my own there quite a lot because office staff had gone away or whatever, and I'd still know in my head that I looked good, so it didn't even matter that there was no one there.
Well, just so you know, when I walked in and saw you, I appreciated it. I thought to myself, he looks like a good yogi.
Yeah. Well, there you go. It was working. That lotus push. But just to comment on that, actually, the lotus posture, because I'm back in meditation again and I'm doing it again. But it's an interesting one because I think I started meditating when I was about 22, and a couple of years before I'd been CSA, and I had thought that the lotus posture was a thing that you needed to be able to do because, I got introduced to meditation mostly at the start through Buddhism. And if you've ever been to a Buddhist retreat or a Buddhist center, they usually make you sit on the floor. So I was sitting on the floor and I just thought that was the way you had to do things. So I practiced it extensively. And then a couple of years later, I really wanted to be able to do the full lotus. And so I did that for a while. And I was just curious, or not even curious, frustrated. Why, if this is supposed to be the posture that you're supposed to be in, why can't I just do the full lotus for an hour or 2 hours without getting these weird pains in my ankles?
Right.
So now when I sit to meditate, I've actually given up. I do still like to sit cross-legged, but I don't need to do the half lotus. I don't need to have my leg up on my lap or anything like that.
Right.
Because you do, after you've given up for a little while and you go back to doing a posture like that, you do kind of realize that the knees and the ankles, as much as mine are very accustomed to it, but even still, in the long term, if I was to continue doing this for 20 more years, sitting in, it's a funny angle to have your knees and your ankles in. So yeah, I'm not as committed to them, let's say, as I was back in CSA.
Well, you mentioned that you sort of started to look at yourself and life knocked you around a little bit in that area. Do you mind speaking about, sort of what happened and what was going on internally that kind of made you reevaluate some things there?
Yeah, well, as most of our experiences are quite personal. This is a very personal experience for me, so I'm not going to go into all the details of like life at that very time. But essentially, it was up until 2013, I had been living very routinely, very dedicatedly, committedly to a practice of morning meditation, evening meditation, and then sometimes in the middle of the day, and then maybe a couple of extra hours and 1 day a week. And then obviously the reading and everything that made someone a good yogi, everything that was kind of expected of him.
Right.
And I was doing it all, and I was enjoying it. But life presented me with circumstances which, up until that point, I had it very easy, because I hadn't the same responsibilities as, let's say, some of your listeners here. I didn't have a family, and I did have a job, and I had things like that, but I was my own man, essentially. And then I got life became a little bit more complicated, and it just kind of kicked me around in such ways that I was forced to look at, well, I'm upsetting people here, and then this is causing me to get upset. And even though I have been meditating all this while, none of it's kind of helping the situation. And the only real way I could help the situation was just to let go of my fanaticism, because when I look back now, there wasn't balance. There wasn't, yoga teaches, there's even chants about spirit and nature just being one thing. But even though I had that academically or theoretically in my head all worked out, oh yeah, spirit and nature is the same thing, no problem. I got that.
Right.
It was also clear cut in conversations and stuff like that, but in the reality of it, I hurt people, and as I said, I hurt myself as a consequence, and I made situations more difficult.
So what you're saying is, you were sitting there meditating, and someone came up to you and said, "You are hurting me."
No.
Okay.
I suppose that would be like how it would be if it was a cartoon strip cut down to one single frame. It might be like that, but it was it was more that I was not attending to the individuals that were in my life at the time, not attending to responsibilities I thought I was.
Right.
But you know what? This is me looking at it through my own eyes. If I had you look at if I was to go into all the details of the situation and all the ins and outs of everything, you might say, "No, Dave, you were fine doing the meditation." You might, but it's just what I've really learned is life is a really interesting way of you finding meaning in the way that you want to help you. I don't know if it's to help you, but it pushes you to go in a way that you want to go. So basically, maybe there was a part of me that just really wanted to let go of the routine and let go of all the different aspects of being a yogi that I had nurtured and cultivated. And maybe there's a part of me that just wanted out of that for a while, because I had started. I know you started from a young age, but for me too, I felt like I started from a young age when I was 22, and when I was younger, in my early teens and as a child, I was quite religious as a Catholic, in Ireland. And so maybe there was a part of me which just wanted to let loose a little bit, and I put the narrative on the story to facilitate my whole letting go. But it didn't feel like that at the time. At the time, it felt like if I want to make these current situation better and easier for everyone that's involved, I need to just take my foot off the pedal of being a yogi in the way I have been, and just be a bit more rounded and a bit more balanced in the way I'm living.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's completely valid and important. I mean, I can remember the first 5 years that I was involved with CSA, like you, I was quite fanatic, and who knows, maybe it's just a shared Catholic upbringing, that there's one right way and you better be doing it.
Yeah.
But, after about 5 to 7 years, I didn't myself mellow out in the sense of what I was doing, but I mellowed out in regards to how I was interacting with friends and family in that area.
Yeah.
And I found, I actually had a few of my friends say to me, "I'm so glad you're not acting the same way, because it was ridiculous." Pushing people away, or kind of expecting them to be certain ways because I'm a yogi and therefore I should be surrounded by people who are also. That's how I approached it, and that caused issues for me.
Yes,
go ahead.
Well, just the judgmental side, people don't want to be around you if you're just looking at them with skewered eyes, kind of going, "What are you doing?"
Right, exactly. And I can even remember early on with Melissa, I was so into it, and she was too, but she wasn't doing it the same way I was, because I was a morning person and she wasn't. And I can remember after about 1.5 years, I actually thought in my mind, well, if she doesn't really get with it, if she doesn't get serious, then I don't know if this relationship is going to work. And somehow that came up to Roy, and Roy just pointed at me and said, "You leave her alone. she knows what she's doing."
Yeah. It was good to have the advice.
Yeah. Well, anyway, and back to that whole idea that you're talking about, I don't see it as much now, mainly because I think personally I'm not that way now. But when people start taking their path so seriously that they think everyone else needs to be doing it. I mean, and maybe that's probably not what you were doing, right? You were just kind of holding yourself to a certain standard, and that was interfering with your ability to relate to others. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, well, exactly. And now as we're talking about it, it just feels like it's just something that comes with youth, maybe, in your 20s and even in your 30s, you don't really have the same wherewithal. But I think what I was doing, because as I mentioned, like when I first got into meditation and stuff, I was actually living in Spain, my first time living away from home. And when you're traveling and you're going from one country or one city to another, and you're living in different places, there is a natural ability to make new social circles. And because I was on this quest or journey of self-discovery, as it was back then, it was kind of like the whole thing was very much. I was able to reinvent myself every single time I moved to a new place. Which meant that it was easy to lose contact with people from before. Now this is personality as well. Not everybody's like this, but it was just, I'd make friends and I'd be close to people, but because it kept on happening, it's hard to keep in touch with everybody all the time. And when I came back to Ireland, the first time I came back to Ireland was 2008 to live here again, and it's just. It wasn't really something I went around telling people, that I was a meditator and that I was an ordained minister with CSA. It didn't. People do meditate in Ireland, and Buddhism is really what people practice here more than anything. And I think it's just a consequence of the fact that the Catholic Church was a very powerful institution for such a long time, that people find it easier to go with a doctrine which isn't so imposing. It doesn't have all the religious connotations or all the let's say religious background. Buddhism, just because it's not even Buddhism people are practicing, it could be just mindfulness or something like that. And so I didn't really go around flaunting it. So I wasn't really looking to be known as a yoga teacher or meditator, except when I was actually doing those things with other people.
Right.
So in terms of my social life, I had friends, I had people that were close, but I didn't really have any. I didn't get very, very close to people, just because my practice was more important to me, and I didn't want to have the interference of, having to compromise and say, yeah, I'll go to the pub with you and watch you drink for It's, it's kind of like I didn't want that interference because I just knew Irish culture, and I had been outside of it for such a while that it was easy for me to be almost like a foreigner in my own country, and it made it very easy for me to pick what I wanted to be part of and not be part of. But it actually, in the long run, isolated me because I was just living, as my dad used to say at the time. He said, "You live like a monk," and that's essentially what had been going on. So I don't think I could have, unless I went into monkhood or something like that. But there was a part of me, definitely subconscious tendencies, which just needed to be, they were being suppressed, not being managed in a healthy way. So you can live the yogi life. Like I could live it, and I was doing it, but there was definitely going to be a breaking point. I just I didn't see it coming.
Right. Yeah. And that brings up all kinds of interesting ideas. But before we get to those, so I just had an idea. It seems like when I finally do make it to Ireland, maybe we should schedule some pub discussions.
As in the pub and have a conversation,
right?
That sounds like I'm very well versed in that now. but it's actually interesting with this whole COVID-19 thing, and the pubs, Irish pubs, the future is uncertain. The culture might have a whole huge dramatic shift that I hadn't been expecting. So hopefully there'll be one open for you.
Well, instead of yoga studios, we'll just have sessions in the pub. But so then those changes that you went through, the reason I'm so interested in this is because I see so many people either that I've met at retreats or people who've attempted to learn Kriya Yoga. I see so many people, they get caught up in this particular image or lifestyle of what it's supposed to be like, that they don't really kind of remember or recognize that, for example, in the Holy Science, Sri Yukteswar talks about how, we practice our meditation, our yoga on our own, and it's our own personal work. And we do what we do so that many of us can still be, as he calls them, householders to fulfill their heart's desire, meaning that they are practicing their yoga and their meditation to realize what is true, but they're also able to fulfill that innate heart's desire of why they kind of incarnated as an individual in the first place, which is why not everyone is so, not everyone is exactly the same, built like a robot.
Yeah.
And even Lahiri Mahasaya, he was a householder. He ended up having 5 kids after he met Babaji. So I just see so many people getting caught up in trying to live their life like Sri Yukteswar did as he was leading his hermitage, or as Yogananda did, not recognizing that we are all unique expressions, and we can't really live like Yogananda in the sense of doing what he did externally. We can do it internally, and then people get so hung up on that they become, in a sense, kind of miserable, and they don't really experience the freedom that the whole spiritual process is supposed to give to them.
That's very true. That's pretty much it. Maybe we should just end on that.
Well,
nice talking. I think you just hit the nail on the head. But as you were talking there, I was just thinking that, going back to what I said, it's very easy to, because you read a lot of things. We tend to talk. You hear the information, you receive the concepts, and then you receive an explanation of the concepts, and then you read books about the same concept or similar concepts being explained again, and you come across all this information. There's a whole swarm of information, and then we just highlight with our nice green highlighter pen in our mind. We just go over the things that we deem to be important, and then we make a checklist of all these things that we need to do. And so, if I can turn my life as seemingly similar as Sri Yukteswar's or Lahiri Mahasaya or whatever, then I'll be able to, I won't be hanging around with people who are going to affect my practice. I won't be breaking my routine in any way. I won't be doing these things. I'll be a good yogi. Right. I'll be a very good yogi. And you'll be able to tick all those boxes so much easier. And there's just this sense of being a good person, a good student, and a good yogi. And I think, the sense of guilt that I used to experience anyway, if I missed a meditation session, even if it was for good reason, you know,
Right.
or if I didn't get the hour session in, if it was just 30 minutes and not the hour, it was like, oof. You know, it's kind of like, you're so hard on yourself.
Right.
And I think that it's, you know, we don't actually know what the lives of these great masters were actually like, but I'm one thing sure, that they definitely knew how to be flexible,
Yes.
and to be self-loving, and to be compassionate with other people. But when you have that such a high standard for yourself, it's whether explicitly or, you know, covertly, it's you're holding other people to that similar standard in their
Hmm.
practice, and it just turns you can get very nasty as a person inside, and I think I got
Hmm.
there. Yeah.
Right. Well, you're not saying that you were actually outwardly nasty. You're just saying sort of like the inner dialogue that was going on was kind of
Yeah,
divisive.
yeah. Like when I say nasty, maybe I'm even a bit hard on myself now, but there was judgment. You know, there's definitely a judgment going on, because if you're able to be judgmental of yourself in the same way, it's, you know, you can imagine it's not so hard to be
Right.
judgmental with other people.
So what happened then, after you, I mean, because I remember having at various points in the whole process, certain doubts arising and sort of changing my way that I was relating to the world and the teaching and those sorts of things.
Hmm.
And for me, that was hard. I mean, like it was almost as if I was telling, the person I loved the most, like, I'm sorry, I just can't do that anymore. It was a lot of inner struggle. So did you experience that too when you started to kind of let go of this sort of rigidity that you were holding on to?
Oh God, the letting go. I think I might have mentioned to you before in a previous conversation. It's an addiction, and it's like going cold turkey. Well,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily cold turkey, but it's like you're letting go. I did go cold turkey eventually, because, you know, you're trying to ease yourself or wean yourself off of being as fanatical, but that's really hard because
Right.
going cold turkey is the only real. Well, it was the only solution for me. And what I did was, you have to accept, first of all, you kind of have to accept that this I can't expect myself to be as good a yogi, if I'm, you know, basically, if I'm going to stop doing the practices of a yogi, I need to be able to see myself as a yogi all the same. How am I going to do that? So there's this huge kind of conflict, I suppose, going on. Um, and, you know, sitting to meditate, every time you sit to meditate, you get the kick, you get the buzz, you get the communion. Essentially, you're having this communion with yourself at a deep level, and you're having the community, that expansive consciousness. And then when you're not doing it, you where do you get the kick? It was hard, because it's basically every structure that you had in place, or you've established, and I had established it over 10 years, you know, a bit more. So every structure I put in place to define who I was, to define not just as a yogi, but as a person, this was my whole life. And so to break it down, um, yeah, I would say, you nearly say that it was semi-traumatic, you know, or if not traumatic. And it's just because you're not doing it in isolation, you're doing it in the context of, well, I was doing it in the context of my life experiences. So
Right.
everything that was going on was, it was sort of like just being kicked around for a good while.
Yeah.
Um, and in the past, you know, yoga would have been the thing you go to. Meditation would have, if I was feeling mentally unstable, or, you know, feeling tumult of emotions, that you know, you go into meditation and reflect and whatever. But I didn't have that, because I was letting go of it. So
Right.
yeah.
So did you? I'm just trying to kind of put myself in that space again. So did you learn that you were actually okay, even though you weren't defining yourself in those old ways, or holding yourself to that same kind of rigid routine?
Yeah, like it wasn't overnight, because also you have in your head going on is, um, like, the masters are there, you know, they're there, you know, that connection that you remind yourself of so regularly during the day, you know, with the lineage, and with all the teachers that have given you so much, and there's a sense of failure and letdown and guilt that goes on for a while. But I started to realize that they weren't judging me, you know, nobody was
Mm-hmm.
judging me, the only judge was myself. And so, yeah, you gradually come to realize, you know what, I think what the biggest there was a couple of big realizations, and it's hard for me to go through them all, but the biggest one was that everything's fine.
Mm.
And the second one was, I know nothing.
Right.
I know absolutely nothing, because that's the thing. You know, when you're studying yoga, and you do get so many concepts, and you spend so much time trying to come to terms what reality is, as is being expounded by people who have mastered life in this realm, and who have mastered certain practices in order to be able to live a life in harmony with, with everything that it is.
Right.
And you're trying to get your head around how it's all been explained, and then you have your own self-talk on top of it, and you've got everything going on, that it just becomes a mess inside your head. Well, it became a mess inside my head, and
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had it all worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very refreshing as I stopped meditating, and I stopped committing to the practice, and being so rigorous in just being mechanical about the whole thing. And and when I stopped reading the same concepts over and over, they started to, I suppose, they were still there, obviously, but I wasn't brooding over them, or trying to I wasn't trying to, first of all, I wasn't trying to make sense of them. Then I wasn't feeling proud that I knew them all. And then I wasn't being able to reiterate them in conversations with other people. So it was literally like they were there, but they had they weren't defining me anymore.
Right.
And so it just got to a point when I realized that they are just concepts,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually have no real weight at all. And so it was and even now it's all the time. I'm reading something or going back over something I used to know before. I was just listening about the gunas earlier on, different things that I knew quite well, but it doesn't have the same. It's not the same anymore. It's not like it's like, oh, I need to thrive on this concept now.
Right.
Yeah. So
And that just brings up so many different directions, because on one hand, this is the reason I wanted to have this conversation, because I appreciate, what you're sharing and your perspective. On the other hand, what keeps kind of popping back up into my mind is that, is this really going to be a great conversation for people who are just sort of halfway into it? And again, am I being judgmental there? And when I say that, I mean, people want to practice meditation, and they want to realize and recognize these super conscious states and experiences. And personally, I don't think most people can or do, because they don't have the discipline, and they don't have the ability to say organize their diet and exercise regularly, and try to keep dramatic people, as manage them within your life, those sorts of things. So on one hand, I'm appreciating what we're discussing, but on the other hand, I'm afraid of the people who are kind of not quite into it and say, well, see, I don't have to worry about it anyway. And then,
yeah.
you understand?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I've been writing some things recently, and like when you're looking at my, let's say, narrative, my story, it's not really a very good one for promoting the life of a yogi.
Right.
But I am not at all opposing the life of a yogi. It's just that I misconstrued what that actually meant
Right.
for a long time, and I nurtured the wrong interpretation. And I suppose if you're going to, like, for anybody listening who may be beginning their practice, or might be new to the world of yoga, or whatever it might be, that, like, I see it now. Discipline is super important.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline is super important. But discipline, the way I had discipline down was meditation, what I eat, basic lifestyle principles. But I think it's very important to kind of put in there that discipline is in the way you're thinking. And it's not just about the practical things. Like, discipline is about you holistically, physical, mental, and emotional. It's because I think that one thing that I could have bettered my practice with was, I did have tendencies to go down certain ways of thinking, certain ways of feeling. I had that, and I recognized it in myself, and I knew it was there. But I didn't have the discipline. I had the discipline to get up in the morning. I had the discipline to eat the right foods, all that kind of discipline. But I didn't have the discipline to create boundaries in order to in order to guide myself when I got into an old behavioral pattern that wasn't good for me. So I think discipline needs to be holistic. It can't just be about, getting up at the right time and doing the formal practices. Because I think that's how you can create the illusion that you're a great yogi.
Right.
It's because you're doing all those formal practices. But, when nobody's looking and in your own head, and at other times, you're doing stuff that you're not. You would never like anybody to know about.
Right.
But I was at the Kumbh Mela there a couple of years ago, and there was a Swami. His name is Muniji, and he had set up camp there for some people from the West. There was a big Brazilian party and things like that. When I say Brazilian party, I mean a group of people.
Isn't a group of Brazilians always a party?
Yeah.
But at least the ones I've met, they always seem to be very, very, very lively.
Well, they absolutely. Well, they have a reputation anyway.
Yeah.
But actually, saying that, they even got him dancing at one point. He had lived his life as a Muni. He hadn't spoken for many years. But I was watching him at one point, and it was very interesting to see how he'd interact with people and how he'd engage in certain kinds of conversation. Obviously, he had created boundaries and limitations in how he wanted to. Like, he didn't really, at the time, I noted that he didn't really interact with the opposite sex. Mm. Maybe it was something that for him was, as a monk, he just wasn't going to do it. He would let the female monk who was beside him, he would let her address all the answers to their questions. Mm. And there was, like, up on stage when you're talking about party there, he was with the Brazilian Baba, I can't remember his name, and they were talking, and the Brazilian Baba was down with all the dancing. He was of Brazilian culture. He was in it. But Muniji, he did a little bit, but he didn't let himself get into to a space where he was going to compromise what he felt he needed to discipline. Mm. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has to do that, but it's what was working for him to stay within the boundaries of what was going to keep him mentally and emotionally stable. And I think that is not black and white. I think that every person has to come up with that's something that no book can really tell you. They can tell you about the relationships. They can tell you about the kind of conversations to get involved in a generic kind of way. But in your life, you need to discern the things that kind of get you into thought patterns that aren't going to be helpful, or get you into conversations with people, or maybe even just personal practices that you do they're not going to get you anywhere. But no book can actually give that to you, and that's where you're on your own.
Yeah, and that's a very, very important point. I'm glad you mentioned that. In the Yoga Sutras, whether it's just my own sort of personal interpretation of it or not, but when the description or the definition of Kriya Yoga is given, one of the terms in there refers to personal self-study or study of one's own personal mantra. That's kind of how it comes out. And, on one hand, people can kind of take that literally. Oh, it's the mantra that personally was given to me by my guru. Or it is the study of this thing that, say, for example, Ramana Maharshi calls the self. But there's that other level of it that you're talking about, which is, okay, I'm here. I know that, yes, my hormones, my nervous system, my body will be will have a better foundation support to realize higher states of consciousness if I get on a regular sleep schedule, eat good food and exercise and stretch. I know that meditation, if I do it on a regular schedule, that will help keep me centered. But then there's the rest of the day. And in the rest of the day, that's where the individualized aspect of this vast consciousness, which we are as a mind, body, personality, like you have to engage that. It's not just eat right, exercise, meditate at your prescribed times, and then the rest of the time it's just see what happens. Like, you pay attention. Yeah, you pay attention, and if you pay attention, you recognize, oh, well, yesterday I was somewhat depressed. Today I feel pretty good. It's a good day. The next day I feel pretty neutral, and if you pay attention to that, you start to recognize, number one, that there is that observer which is not changing, that experiences all that. But then you also recognize, oh, well, if I start recognizing I'm going down this particular type of thoughts or emotional experience, excuse me, I can find a way to work with that. It doesn't have to just be again, whatever, and then let it go. Like part of the whole process of Kriya Yoga is every aspect of your life, including those things.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
I think it was something I heard you quoting Yogananda in something you one of your videos, saying that 90% of it is psychological, and the other
right.
10% just kind of unfolds naturally. Well, not you know, it won't just unfold, but you know, but it makes it is so much about that. It's the just the holistic as an expression within this realm. It's holistic. We can't separate what we do on a day-to-day level from our practice. It just doesn't work.
Well, I mean, really, if you think about it, and this is something that's kind of popped into my mind often, why were we drawn towards, you know, meditation and Kriya Yoga and spirituality? I mean, if life was open and free and we weren't subjected to these sort of ups and downs and so on, I mean, would we really have even cared to touch upon that? So if we're able to live in such a way that we are psychologically healthy, and by that I don't mean reaching a state where everything's just peachy all the time. I mean where you recognize that you are capable, meaning that as life comes, you can respond to it, and that's life. That's okay. That's a holistic approach to it, and then a sense of peace develops.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's always interesting, having been involved in this for so long, and then seeing all these different organizations and teachers and the things that they promote, and recognizing that a lot of what we're doing, it's really just learning how to be alive. I mean, that's how I experience it.
Well, that's something which kind of became more apparent to me, because when I got into, or when I became aware of coaching as a service, as a craft, it was around the same time as I was going through my reflection on being a yogi. And it is very interesting when you look at what's going on in the world of self-help or even coaching, or like the principles are very, very similar, if not, you know, derived from them directly in some cases. But coaching has quite a few practices, and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's got a lot of practices to help people to manage their mind and to gain that kind of mastery over what's going on. So as they're not just being dictated to. It's more and more prominent everywhere. But when you talk about yoga, I think I heard Ellen Grace O'Brien, she described it as the manual for life. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is the manual for life, and it is that. I think it's making it personal to you, because there's a lot of concepts in it, and there's a lot of ideas in it. And one of the things which I think of the Yoga Sutras, which sometimes gets overlooked, is the yamas and niyamas, because we're so focused on the internalization and then the concentration, the meditation. We just want the samadhi, you know. But the yamas and niyamas, that's pretty much like, if you're missing any one of them in any capacity, and the way they can apply themselves, you know, truthfulness is a very, very broad term. You know, how do you interpret truthfulness? So what does that mean to you? And then defining it, and then like that directly impacts your sitting to meditate every single day. So I think the yamas and niyamas are one aspect of the Yoga Sutras which we need to have a kind of a personal interpretation of. Right. Like where we've done our own commentary for ourselves, and it really makes sense to us, and we can live by it. Because otherwise, our minds would just be upset and unsettled.
Right, and there's a reason that, you know, in the 8 limbs of yoga, the yamas and niyamas are the first ones.
Yeah.
And it's really a hard thing. You're right. It's a hard thing to express to people, because, as you said, and that takes me back to that question that we had earlier, which was, why are people really wanting to learn this stuff? And you mentioned the idea of it kind of the practices and sometimes being an addiction, because, you know, you're not feeling good. Well, you know, some people just go out and have a cigarette. But what's the yogi do? The yogi says, "Oh, well, I better go and meditate for a couple hours." I mean, there's this that kind of response to things, and that's not quite. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's better to go meditate than have a cigarette. I'm not going to make any judgments on that. But why are people getting into this? Because they want, as you mentioned, the samadhi. They want the oneness experience. They want to know that everything fits, that everything's all right. Like that's, at least in my mind, that seems to be like a driving factor. I mean, how many people have you met that really, I mean, I'm not talking about people you've read about. I'm talking about people you've met that really said, you know why I got involved in meditation? Because I just love God so much. And I just, I mean, have you really met any of them that sort of started out that way?
Well, yeah, I haven't.
Yeah.
I thought, how can you, to love, before you get into any of this and declaring that you love God so much, it kind of means that you know who he is or she is or it is or
Right.
kind of, that's when you complete the comparisons with the cigarettes or chocolate or whatever your go-to is when you're in a difficult situation. I think that is quite valid, because if I have an issue, whatever it might be, with a relationship with somebody at work or a different thing, meditation can be good to kind of get objective and have a look at it from that clear objective awareness. But I found myself not always because I had an issue or something, but sometimes meditation it's the communion that takes place, because you get into a state which is very it's that blissful state, and you get into a very blissful state, and the memory of that when you're participating in life or when something's going on and something doesn't go your way or something, ordinarily you would have to confront the situation or make some kind of effort to harmonize the situation or, to work things out. And for some people, they might go for a cigarette and then afterwards go back and sort it out. But maybe from my own experience, it was a case of going into meditation and then expecting that illumination to kind of just be able to put me as the superior person in the conflict or in the argument, because it gives you this sense of righteousness, I think, that is isn't the same for somebody who's smoking a cigarette or chocolate. and,
Right.
and then so it could lead to a couple of different reactions. It could be that you're sitting in the meditation and you're like, okay, I'm grand now, everything's fine because I've done this communion and I'm sick, but you haven't actually dealt with the matter at hand. Or it could be the case that you get into that state and you go to try and deal with the matter at hand, but you're so I'm doing inverted commas here. You're so illuminated and so righteous now that the other person, they can't even relate to you because you're not even coming at them from the understanding of what the issue is. You're a bit more high and mighty about the whole thing.
Right. If they just knew everything was consciousness, well, then they would understand.
Like the word that comes to my mind and is just, it's meditation can be a great way to just escape when things aren't going well or going the way you like them to go. And if in my practice, I definitely, because I remember Roy Davis, it's so often he would talk about the story with him meeting Yogananda and how Yogananda would say, it's not a path of escapism. And Roy would tell this story, like he'd make a point of telling this story every time there was a retreat. And I remember listening to it and kind of go, yeah, that's not me. I'm not doing that. But I think it's a very valid question that we all have to sit down and ask ourselves. Like when I am a yogi now and I am meditating and I'm giving over this so much of my life to these formal practices. And then I'm intending to incorporate all these other things into the way I live my life. What am I doing it for? Like, what is it all about? And when I sit to meditate, I've got my routine. Why do I get upset if somebody walks into the room in the middle of my meditation? Like, what is it about that really upsets me? Because there's just so many things that we kind of have to take into consideration when we think of this is me doing my spiritual practices. The whole idea of separateness and the whole idea of all things being one. I think they kind of just rehash
Right.
the idea that we just need to remind ourselves that nothing really matters. It's kind of like you just do the practice and don't get so hung up in it.
Right. Yeah. That's, when I kind of think back to how I thought yoga worked, my sense was, well, if I like you, if I'm disciplined with waking up at the same time every day, meditating for a couple hours every day, eating the right foods, stopping myself from being surrounded by really dramatic people, my thought was that then I won't have to worry about anything because life is just going to go exactly. There won't be anything to contend with.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people might have that kind of perspective when even Mr. Davis, when he would talk about, say, problem solving, he wasn't against problem solving. He never said, just do all these things and everything will be perfect all the time. What he would say is, if you meditate, don't problem solve in your meditation. But if life is happening, then meditate and get as clear as possible. And then do the problem solving or the brainstorming afterwards.
Yeah.
Because you'll be in a clearer state for it. But it didn't stop there. It wasn't just brainstorm, problem solve. It was, now go attend to whatever to do is right to work that out.
Yeah, that's the third step is crucial.
Well, and then the fourth step, which goes to the Bhagavad Gita, we are entitled to action only, not the fruits of our actions. So again, yes. And you let me know if you can relate to this. This was the pattern that I had. It was obviously I also got involved early on, so it was, okay, if you just follow the procedures and formulas perfectly, then nothing bad is going to happen. And then if something does come up, well, then we follow, meditate, we brainstorm, and then we attempt to do what we know is going to be right. That's going to help balance the situation. But even there, I would get stuck thinking that if I meditated, brainstormed, came to an inspired decision, then everything would work out perfectly after that. And I was leaving out that fourth step of, we are entitled to action only, not the fruits of our action. So it's almost as if the full range of it is, have the foundation of your discipline so that life is as solid as it possibly can be. And then be open and adaptable to relating to life as it presents itself. And then even after you've done your best, you have to let go of the attachment to things going your way. You just, that's not going to get anyone anywhere in the long term. But it's a hard thing to swallow, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I think we're getting to a space which I'm not always very good at explaining things, but in this context, but it's kind of like the crux of the whole practice, because life is life, and the representation here of life through this body that is speaking to Ryan right now. Even the things I'm saying to you in this podcast. I don't know what whose ears it'll fall on, and I don't know if it'll benefit anybody in any way, or it's kind of just trusting it. And it's I think it's that, just accepting that life is just doing its thing, and we do our best. And so when you sit down to meditate and you get into that state of mind, you get objective, then you look at the problem and you come about with ways that might work. But ultimately, life's just doing its thing, and and that's all you are, is just a part of that life. I find that sense of unity with the flow of all things is kind of just reassuring that I don't need to tick all the boxes all the time, because sometimes life doesn't want to tick the box. Life actually wants things to go shit because that's going to have another. I can't know. I just don't know everything.
Well, and that's a very important point, and that's just the cycle of life. I mean, things are born, they grow old, they die, they rot, they recycle. Things are born, they grow old, they die, they rot, they recycle. Things are, it just keeps happening. And the more we avoid that, and I think that, you mentioned the whole pandemic issue here, possibly, maybe that might really bring that to people's awareness, this whole experience, because, as I was reflecting over the last maybe 20, 30, 40 years of human history, I know there have been difficult areas in the world where things haven't been so good and even outright brutal, but it seemed to me like the majority of the human population, with the advent of the internet and all these different ways of communicating and having things shipped around the world, and I mean, just amazing advances, it makes me think that humans over the last 20 to 40 years have really become kind of unaware of the fact that they are part of life, nature.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to swallow sometimes. But like you said, if you can kind of realize and relate to that flow of life, and that you are that life, you use the word reassuring. To me, it feels very peaceful, because it's like, I don't have to figure everything out.
Yeah.
But I know, I don't know, I feel, I experience this wholeness, and that's in a way kind of feels like a deeper sense of faith, rather than the faith of, if I do A, B, and C, and D, then E is going to happen. That is that faith.
Yeah, for me, it's a form of realization, because when you're living with that, well, if you're living with that continuously, that contentment, reassurance, the trust, the faith in it's like, it's not my gig, it's the, I'm going to say, the divine's gig, but it's life's gig, it's pure consciousness gig, it's just a gig, it's happening, yeah, there's no right or wrong. It's not black and white, it's just, I don't want to say there's no right or wrong, but there's no black and white. It's not black and white, and that's why I think, when you have the concepts of yoga and you've got the structure of how to practice it, this is great, because it gives you that streamlined, known to work way of disciplining the body and the mind and the emotions. At the same time, there's aspects of it which you definitely need to work out on your, not work out on your own, but you need to apply it and reflect on it in your own life. And for me, I of late, I've tended to, I've gotten some therapy, which in Ireland is in the last few years, it's become more, let's say, every day, but there's a huge stigma to that for many, many years. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's beneficial for people to really accept that there's a lot in their head that they're not always willing to look at, and it can be beneficial just to get cleared up, rather than thinking that you can just work through everything on your own, if you're meditating,
Well, yes, and that's the beginning of the Yoga Sutras, where it states, and now instruction in yoga. And my undergraduate was in psychology, so I had some insights into this, and I was never averse to getting counseling when I needed. Even now, after Melissa passed, that was something I really had to do. My spirituality helped to keep me meditating and working through this stuff, but I still needed that extra support in order to work out the stuff that Ryan was processing.
Yes.
And going back to that quote of, and now instruction in yoga practice, personally, it seems to me that it is extremely important to spend some time working out whatever your own little psychological complexes and quirks are, because if you don't work them out before you start going into something like meditation and self-realization, you're going to, if your goal is something like self-realization, you're going to bring all those fantasies and conditions and quirks and attachments and aversions into your practice, and it's going to be so subtle you're not even really going to know that it's there.
Yeah, and it can be shocking
once you realize it. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. I liked how Roy, I remember how he used the word karma, but he didn't use it a lot. He referred more to subconscious tendencies, and I think when you say it like that, subconscious tendencies, like the subconscious mind, and there's a lot going on in there that that if we put the word karma on it, it has this whole other let's say power or way. We treat it in a certain way. It's just my karma. It's karma, whatever. But when you say subconscious tendencies, it gives you the power back a little bit. It gives you that chance, like you said, to really take time out and work through it and get to the bottom of things.
Right. So we didn't quite get around to the point, so maybe we can do this now. The point where we kind of discussed your reentry back into meditation practice and those sorts of things. So what was that like, and how is your experience different now that you're kind of you've reevaluated, you've took some time, and now you're kind of restarting, reigniting the process?
Well, I did about 2 years of hard detox when I
Okay.
came back to Ireland, and that continued because I was restarting my life and reestablishing my life here in Ireland again. So for about another year, I still continued a kind of a semi-detox. Well, I wasn't meditating, but then I would meditate, but I just didn't have the discipline. I wasn't as scheduled or routine, and it was far more spontaneous and haphazard. And there could go weeks when I might not meditate, and then maybe then another day I try and meditate for 2 or 3 weeks, but 1 or 2 or 3 hours. But one thing you start to notice is the mind, and just how much of an impact meditation actually has in terms of relating to the world. So let me try and answer your question more directly and not be too Irish. I want to go all Irish on you.
That's okay.
So in the last 6 months, I'd say I've had more of a scheduled routine. And it was small, maybe 30 minutes once a day, and then just building on it. One thing I refrained from a lot is just reading a lot of texts. It was more about really just having the experience, because I have a lot of, I have all of the seeds that were planted many years ago, so all that stuff is in there. But then in the last, since maybe the last 3 weeks, maybe last 5 weeks actually, I've been more associating with the information, the concepts, and kind of become reacquainted with them. But as I mentioned, it's a different relationship now, and actually the whole thing is slightly different in terms of, do I call myself a yogi? I'm a bit cautious, but that might just be me, And then there's just like the meditation practice. As I said, I sitting to meditate is still amazing in terms of I enjoy the process. I enjoy. Just not the techniques. It's not like I'm enjoying the techniques, but I like the communion that comes about of it. And obviously, I want to transcend the communion, and I want to experience greater insight. Well, it's a personal practice at the moment. I'm not out there teaching or doing anything like that, and I've found that in the last couple of years, because I haven't been heavily involved in meditation and yoga, I've built up social circles with people from all walks of life, and I've been enjoying, fulfilling my heart's desires, as you've mentioned, and I've been able to just appreciate life as a person involved in life, as
Right.
opposed to as a yogi who had this regimented way of looking at things. But now I'm incorporating meditation into that, and it just feels like it won't have a clutch on me
Right.
in this way of making me feel guilty or not. It's a pleasure to be able to meditate, but it's not a chore. So it's good.
So it's more obviously personal in that you're having the personal experience, and then you're just going into your life and you're relating to the people that are there that you've met, and it's just more natural and easy. Is that kind of how you might describe it?
Yeah, because I suppose because I'm more rounded as an individual now, and I have friends who may have dabbled in meditation, may have done what they thought was meditation, but might have just been a 5-minute relaxation technique, But I don't judge them, and that's fine. And we have conversations, I'll even have a pint with people from time to time. But I sit and meditate as something which it doesn't define who I am,
Right.
but it gives me access. It gives me that opportunity to get access into understanding what I truly am, and it's that privilege to be able to do that.
And when you talked about that you hadn't been reading as much or studying as much text, and that you've kind of had a different, maybe I'm not remembering it correctly, but kind of like a different relationship with like maybe the principles or the philosophy. Is it more that you are actively engaging them in life rather than sitting around thinking like, oh yeah, I know the yamas and niyamas and truthfulness, don't covet
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Sure, I've got all that. Is it more of like I'm actually really working them into my life versus just kind of keeping them as a text that you've read and then you understand the philosophy of?
That's a really funny. Well, not as funny as in strange, because you should say that, because when I was doing the whole detox, even though I wasn't meditating, all the concepts are there, all of them, and so I was doing that during the detox. Because when you're meditating, you have all the information, you meditate, and it's just you don't really apply the information in a way that maybe it would better suit you. But when I did the detox, I got to take the information and really look at the information rather than just meditating. So now that I'm going back to meditating, and it's like all those concepts, I can see why they're concepts. It's
Right.
kind of like, I can see why they were there in the first place, and how I just didn't always. I just wasn't in the space to really appreciate them, maybe.
Right.
Um, and so now when like I watch a video on YouTube, or it's like, oh, I remember learning that, or I remember hearing that, or I remember reading that umpteen times. But it's like there's a whole other light shone on it, because what's been going on is I've experienced more of life, and I've experienced the concept. I've experienced the actual concept within life. Like if we talk about the gunas or whatever, before that's all theoretical, and you're talking about stuff, and you can know about that, and you can reflect on it and feel like you have it all understood. But when I was going through the kind of that, let's say, the detox phase, and I wasn't doing any of the meditation, those gunas and the way you look at yourself, it's kind of like you are experiencing the concept, and it's not about just breaking it down into words and understanding. It's kind of like this unconscious reflection that's going on constantly.
Right.
And so now when I read about it, I kind of it's just this. It's almost like I'm more familiar with the processes of life or something. It's kind of hard to convey, Ryan. I hope I'm doing an all right job.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah. So if I know this isn't really probably going to be helpful, because if, like, for example, if I was 19 or 20 and I had you now to tell me, this is how you're going to probably think it's supposed to work, and this is how it actually works, I probably wouldn't have listened to you.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so as a futile attempt, let's say that you do, let's say that in Ireland you recognize your calling to teach Kriya Yoga meditation over there, and you decide to really get into it, and people come to one of your talks and they're in their late teens or early 20s, and you can see the zeal and fanaticism in their eyes. What would you say to, could you or would you say anything to them to help maybe try to avoid the initial kind of trap that you or I fell into in the beginning?
Yeah.
Do you think it's
So
possible?
I think it is. I think it's very important for a young individual, especially when um, they're embarking on their new adult life. And I think it's important to have roundedness. So like in coaching, they have this tool called the Wheel of Life, and it's used in different things. But you're looking at different aspects of your life, like your family and your relationships, and then your involvement in the community and work and different aspects of your life. And I think, and spirituality is one of those aspects. It's titled spirituality in the field, but like we're trying to integrate a practice into our lives, which sees no separation really between spirit and nature. We have those terms, spirit and nature, but it's really all just one experience. And so I think it would be important for a young individual, and for anybody really, but for a young individual to understand that as much as the zeal that they have for meditation and other things, they to be responsible for taking, I suppose, action and responsibility for the other aspects of their life. because you don't want to find them derailing because they've missed out on relationships, or they've missed out on things which later they'll see as having been important. I'm not saying that it's like a black and white thing that, you know, maybe someone is suitable for the monkhood and, you know, that's exactly what they should be doing, is just focusing on the more formal practices and spiritual aspects of things. But what I mean is just to have them reflect on it rather than just get caught up in a whirlwind of like just fanatical meditation all the time, hoping that everything will work out. Because also at a young age, we are very insecure, and there's a lot of things going on that, you know, that yoga gives you access to knowledge, which not everybody has, and it gives you the sense of like, I know stuff that not everybody knows. So it's kind of empowering, but also gives you a sense of superiority in some ways. Whether you show it or not, it doesn't matter. It's going on in your head. And then like there's aspects of you as in your early 20s and mid 20s, you can feel insecure in other areas like social life. So it might be easier for you to stay at home than to go out and stay at home and meditate than to go out. So I think it's important, I would say two things, just to look at your life holistically. And the second thing would be, if you feel like it's good to talk to someone, just to have someone to kind of talk to about things. Not necessarily that they're influencing or directing your life or getting an opinion or giving you advice on different things, but just to have a soundboard, somebody that you can actually just hear what you're saying out, or what you're thinking, what's going on in your mind, because the mind can be very tricky.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you think back, and you kind of remember when you first got involved in meditation and met Mr. Davis and sort of all the things that you've gone through, I guess it seems to, what I hear you kind of sharing is that it's important to have those foundational structures to your life that yoga can give, but it's also very important to actually live your life. Yeah.
Like I wrote an email to Mr. Davis, like just, I suppose I had been about 2 years of having stopped meditation, and I was just, you know, he had given me a lot of his time. We had personal meetings while I was there, and he allowed me to spend time in CSA for like many weeks on end, you know, and it wasn't something that everybody could do, and I had a great privilege there. And so I wrote him an email, and I just kind of owned up to the fact that, you know, I hadn't been meditating, and I hadn't been honest with him all the time, because I was realizing certain things about myself, you know, just everything was kind of, the shit had hit the fan, you know. And I was just realizing, oh God, you know, all these meditation for so many years and all this receiving of information, and I had no idea who I really was in this context or that context, you know. And so I wrote him an email, and he just wrote back very simply, self-honesty is fundamental if we want to experience any progress on this path. You know, it's kind of like he was appreciative of the email, but he wasn't judging me or anything. He was just saying that self-honesty is key. And I think, but self-honesty is a really hard thing sometimes, because we're in our own head. And we think we have all the answers, and it's not always that clear cut. So, having a good teacher or a good soundboard or somebody, you know, that you can get a bit of an echo back on those things is good.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, David, it's been wonderful talking to you. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I wasn't sure what I was going to actually say on this podcast. I trust that it'll bear some meaning for some people. And obviously, I am an advocate of the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and my experience is my experience, and it's not, you know, that's the thing. That's the joy of life. Anybody can have, you know, it's not that black and white.
Right. Well, you know, what you shared was very helpful, because I too, since you had asked me earlier, was there going to be a script? Should we plan? I figured, no, we'll just wing it, see how it goes. But I think we touched upon some very important points for people that are, number one, getting started on this path so that they can really take some time to think about what they're doing, why they're doing it. But also, it was wonderful to talk to you because you had been so committed and so serious, and you took a little break and came back around to it with some kind of fresh eyes. That there are plenty of people out there who've been practicing for years and might kind of need a little bit of the same kind of boost towards, all right, well, let's be a little more self-honest to see, why am I doing this, and kind of reevaluate things. So I think it'll be good. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. And we'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
Take care. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This episode of the Kriya Yoga Podcast was made possible by donations from Kriya Yoga apprenticeship students and supporters of our Patreon community at www.patreon.com/Kriya Yoga.